Hello everyone and welcome back to the Top Step. Few things to note straight off the bat on this one. You will only be hearing us, you won't be seeing us, and I apologise for that, but that's due to we had various audio and, as it turns out, video issues as we were recording this one, so we don't have any video for you. And I'm just going to come on here and sort of redo the intro and just let you know what was happening with that. I'm also using a different mic just for now, a sort of Rode clip-on one, so hopefully that doesn't sound too different. The only other thing that we really touched on in the intro was that, well, sorry for being away. We've missed some important stuff in F1 and cricket, and we will be bringing you episodes about that. This one's going to act as a little bit of an Austria and a Silverstone GP roundup. We're just going to quickly head off Austria at the start and then talk about all the fun and exciting stuff that happened in the Grand Prix. In the intro, which I'm now kind of just taping over so you won't hear, we also referenced the fact that the set is new. Johnny's moved house, so we're in a different place. And we're not on a corridor, controversially. But hopefully, when we do bring you video, which will be next episode onwards, it'll be slightly nicer to look at because we were set up quite nicely in the living room on some beanbags with a record player behind us and all that. A very uncomfortable beanbag, actually, in my case. So if you do hear kind of shuffling about, then it's probably me trying to adjust to the beanbag. And apologies if you do hear any references to the set that kind of don't make sense from an audio perspective, but you will see that very soon. And we'll be bringing you some cricket stuff as well, talking about Suryavanshi is in town and of course talking about the massive gaping hole that Ben Stokes leaves in this England test side and everything in the coming weeks. But for now, enjoy this one in F1 and I will jump in straight to Johnny talking about the Austrian GP.
George Russell won a race on merit as well. It was quite nice there. We had a little life update to begin the podcast, and now we can move into the sporting stuffs. But yeah, so the Austrian Grand Prix was a really good one. It was it boiled down to a really fun finish with George Russell, Max Verstappen, and Kimi Antonelli having about 2 seconds between them at the end, which made it really exciting. I suppose the big takeaways from that were Russell winning the race, looking possibly the faster Mercedes driver across the weekend, but possibly Antonelli was quicker in the race because he was able to close down the gap and was right there. And maybe if Max wasn't between the two of them, then he might have been able to have a go at George. And then Max Verstappen was involved in the fight and could very possibly have won the race, was leading at quite a few points in the race and looked like there might be a chance for him to take the win as well, and he was closing in. They were all sort of like bunching up together at the end, but quite a key thing for Max was that in qualifying, and this probably cost him the win, his rear wing didn't close. So they have the aerodynamic situations now where instead of DRS, they have active aero that on the straights with the Red Bull's wing, it sort of flips open to create less drag. But it didn't close when he got to a really high-speed corner, which just sent him off into the barriers, which meant that he qualified only 5th, I believe, and then had to fight through to get towards the front. So that cost him, and I think that's an important little thing to set the scene for coming into the British Grand Prix, with Russell beating Antonelli, but Antonelli possibly still being quicker in the race, Max being right there, but being cost by a rear wing issue, which leads us nicely into the British Grand Prix at Silverstone.
Yeah, but it was a sprint weekend, so that's the first thing we've got to deal with. And Hamilton spring pole at home, as this says.
Yeah, did I still say spring? Well, I mean, no, we can't even claim that it is in the spring now, can we? This is not officially spring.
Maybe he
sprung to pole.
Surprise pole.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Hamilton's spring pole at home. Yeah, Hamilton took pole in the sprint, and that seemed to come as an absolute shock to him and to Ferrari because they were not expecting to be particularly quick here, certainly not in qualifying trim. He seemed really shocked over the radio. But another great lap from Hamilton, certainly in that sprint. He was showing that he still is in very good form. And then that led on to a fantastic battle in the sprint race itself, with Antonelli having to close in on Hamilton, and he left it relatively late to get that job done. It was a very exciting sprint. The nature of the British Grand Prix circuit is that it's very energy starved. Lots of long straights, lots of medium speed corners, not very many heavy braking zones, which meant that, a bit like Australia, sort of recuperating energy was quite difficult, which meant there'll be a lot of instances, and we saw it throughout the race and the sprint race, where a driver would either attack to break free or attack to overtake someone and then be left a sitting duck on the next straight, much like we saw at the earlier part of the season. And we thought maybe we'd seen the back of that in its more extreme form, but it certainly came back to the fore here. So Antonelli, in the end, when he did get to pass Lewis Hamilton, I think he was just in a much better spot with his battery deployment, and it seemed like Mercedes across that sprint were anyway. But, Antonelli way ahead of George Russell. George Russell struggling for pace at the British Grand Prix, his home circuit. So, I think going into the race and qualifying itself, there was lots to ponder for George, who at this point, of course, had just won in Austria, but still was quite a large points gap.
And then what about qualifying itself? What took place there?
Yeah, so in qualifying itself, I haven't actually noted this one down, but it was Kimi Antonelli got pole position, and Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were right behind him. So we had basically the Mercedes. It felt like this felt as a weekend a bit of a throwback to the start of the season, where we'd have Mercedes quick, qualifying on pole, not starting particularly well, and the Ferraris would be right behind them because they were the second quickest car, and then sort of bursting through at the start. And that's exactly what happened. Antonelli qualified on pole, and then you had Leclerc ahead of Hamilton, which maybe is a bit of a surprise because Hamilton has definitely had the measure of Leclerc recently and throughout the weekend to that point. But Leclerc was able to put in a good lap to qualify second. I suppose another big thing from qualifying was that Isaac Hadjar out-qualified Max Verstappen, possibly for the second time this season now. I think it happened in Japan as well. But yeah, as we'll have a big Max discussion. But he had a bit of a nightmare weekend, and he was complaining about having power outages on the straights throughout qualifying and the whole weekend. But to take nothing away from Isaac Hadjar, usually even when Verstappen's having problems, he out-qualifies his teammates. So, and I think pretty quietly, Hadjar's doing a decent job as Verstappen's teammate. But yeah, the stage was set. Antonelli on pole, and then the two Ferraris in behind him.
What happened?
Well, shock horror, the Ferraris got a really good start. Leclerc pretty much off the line. It looked like the first phase of the start, Antonelli got a decent getaway, but then the second phase of the start, he seemed to bog down, and that allowed Leclerc to get through, and then Hamilton to also sweep round the outside of the Mercedes. And yeah, as I said, throwback to the start of the year, two Ferraris going past the Mercedes right at the start, which is kind of what you want, really, for the sake of the race, to have the quicker starting but slower overall car, you'd think, in the lead, with Antonelli in third. And, the pressure on at this point for George Russell to come back. But, that put Leclerc into the lead. And, I mean, just to have a touch on Leclerc, because he would eventually, with a lot of things happening in between, he was able to get the win at the British Grand Prix. And I think you just got to say that fair play to him, because you can quite easily just get stuck in a rut, spiral out of form. And he's had a pretty poor year so far. And it's a fantastic drive from Charles, great qualifying, took the lead at the start of the race, managed a chaotic race throughout, and, delivered fantastically well to show that he is still very much in that fight at Ferrari with Hamilton. He's not a number two driver, and I think it was always only a matter of time before Leclerc turned it around, but I didn't think it would be that quickly. So we'll see if this is the start of something for him, but I think hats off to Charles Leclerc for putting this performance in.
Yeah, certainly one thing as well about the fact that the Ferraris got out past Antonelli from the start meant that we had another sort of Russell-Antonelli battle on our hands in third and fourth. So how did that one pan out?
Well, I think what's interesting is to monitor the race pace of the two drivers, because even though George Russell was at home, British Grand Prix, he spoke in Austria saying that this is the one I'll be looking forward to, Silverstone. I know that like the back of my hand. It still looked like throughout the whole weekend, Antonelli had the legs on George Russell, had the wheels on George Russell, was able to really get the most out of that Mercedes, and he was the one that was pressurising the two Ferraris. And actually, before a certain issue occurred later on in the race, Antonelli was able to get into that fight and could well have pressured Charles Leclerc for the win. Whereas Russell was stuck battling with the Verstappens of this world, with the Norrises, with the McLarens, and wasn't really able to use his pace or to show pace in the same way that Kimi Antonelli was, which is certainly alarming for him going forward. He was fortunate in that, and as we'll get on to, Kimi Antonelli had various woes at the end of the race. But once again, George Russell, and it actually seems to be the case that when at the start of the season he was probably the quicker of the two Mercedes, the luck was against him, and now Antonelli is clearly on top. It seems like the luck might be starting to turn again. But yeah, it was certainly another case of Antonelli being stronger in the race.
Yeah, for Antonelli, when you think back to, 66 points, the gap at one point, I believe, and started to look unassailable already this early on in the season. But then, as we've spoken about a lot this season, Johnny, with the Rosberg factor, if Antonelli starts getting no points in races, then that gap gets closed very quickly. And you really see, if you look at a graph that the BBC did about the way that the point spread has changed over time, Antonelli's points scoring is really grinding to a halt in this last month, and it was no points again for him in this race.
No points again. Yeah, had several issues with the car. Did Kimi Antonelli, and I'm just gonna have a look and see because he wasn't too sure during the race what it was. What's he spotted? What's he spotted? Oh, the Lego race and the fucking president as well. Yeah. I'm so glad he got. I think he did get booed, which I'm very glad that.
Well, he's successfully managed to get rid of term limits, hasn't he?
Yes. Which obviously is a great thing for fairness and equality in elections. But yeah, so that was ridiculous. And what was funny as well is they all tried to cut turn 3 and go through the gravel, and they all just got beached, and half of them just retired. There and then. But so what happened with Antonelli is he ran wide at Copse Corner, and it wasn't actually the tyre that had an issue. It was the front left wheel shield, which broke and changed angle and left him with a really difficult situation. That beanbag is not treating you well. It made it difficult for him to turn the car. It made it difficult for him to have, he had less downforce, he had less cornering ability and aerodynamic performance, which really cost him. He came into the pits a couple of times to try and fix the issue, which dropped him way out. And then also to sort of compound that misery, because he had a problem, and this feels quite harsh, but it is just a bit of a slam dunk thing in Formula One, because he couldn't turn the car, he was running wide everywhere, which means he was abusing track limits. If you do that 3 times, you get a warning that if you do it again, you'll get a penalty. He did it a 4th time, got a 5-second penalty. And then, as we found out later on, the safety car came out, so everyone was really close and bunched in, which dropped him out the points. So that's how he ended up getting no points. And obviously, out of nowhere, George Russell, because he had a slow puncture, that turned out to really help him, because he boxed, got fresh rubber, fought back through, and then because of the safety car, a lot of teams decided to make pit stops to go onto fresh rubber, expecting the race to get back underway. We'll get onto that. He actually jumped up into second from what probably would have been 3rd or 4th. So look, turning possibly in George Russell's favour. And the key thing is that he's now 25 points behind Antonelli, which is exactly a race win. So Antonelli now cannot afford another DNF, basically. So this championship is really back on, and not just necessarily for George Russell. I don't still feel as if Ferrari are consistent enough to get Lewis Hamilton or Charles Leclerc into that title fight. But Hamilton's only 32 points back from Antonelli. George Russell's 25 points back. Charles Leclerc 71. That's quite a way away, but you never know. 71 points. Max Verstappen was over 100 points away halfway through last year and only lost out on the title by 2 points. So, this championship is still pretty wide open, out of nowhere, and it shows how quickly things can turn, right? Because they were turning against George Russell, and now they're turning against Antonelli, and suddenly he's a race win behind.
How soon do you think we might see a decision made by Ferrari, if at all, to favour one of their drivers, when we think about the fact that, if they are going to catch, well, probably Kimi Antonelli, maybe George Russell, but maybe splitting the points, splitting the wins isn't really going to cut it, and that it's actually just going to mean that, if neither driver is dominating, then neither driver will be in that title race. Do you think that's something that Ferrari will do? Obviously, it's made very difficult by the calibre and the status of driver at Ferrari. You've got Leclerc. Mr. Ferrari recently put pen to a new long-term deal. And then, of course, Lewis Hamilton, who is Lewis Hamilton, has won 7 titles and is looking back in firing form again. So, who and when, or if at all, do you think that decision could be made?
That's a really difficult question because it's quite a Ferrari thing to do. But usually Ferrari have a very clear number 1 and number 2 driver. But because this year Hamilton's really stepped it up and Leclerc has probably comparatively dropped off in terms of form a little bit until this race, that really does make it difficult for them. I think it's way too early. I think it's way too early now to start even thinking about that. I think it's too soon. I think maybe you'd be looking at the last third of the season before you start making decisions like that. And I think it actually makes it less likely to happen because it's this way round. I think if Leclerc had a 39-point lead on Hamilton, because he's Mr. Ferrari and he's the golden child, then I think they'd be more likely to try and move Hamilton out of the way because Leclerc is their future. I just imagine they'll let them race until it becomes very apparent that one of them's not got a chance. To be honest, I think that now Leclerc has shown this performance, we're going to see him be a lot closer to Hamilton a lot more often, and probably will start to close that gap back to the point where Ferrari maybe won't be able to make that decision, I would guess. But if it was still this point and there was, say, 5 or 6 races to go, that's when I'd start imagining that they'd start thinking about doing something like that.
You said this week.
Did I say this week?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you did. You said this race weekend was a little bit like the start of the season with the Mercedes qualifying, getting overtaken by the Ferraris early on. But I guess one thing that is similar to the first couple or few weekends of the season is that Leclerc outperformed Hamilton, which actually, the further we've gone into the season, actually hasn't been the case. Could this be anything to do with the new regulations and actually those energy-starved circuits, of which Silverstone was definitely one, suit Leclerc, which I think is the opposite of what we maybe thought would be the case, as he's one of the quote-unquote pure drivers, like with Verstappen and others who have taken some adjusting to the idea of not going flat out in qualifying, for example. And we would have thought that actually, the energy-saving stuff was helping Lewis Hamilton, but actually this month or so that he's had a real purple patch has been in some of the more energy rich circuits. So is there anything going on there, you think, that maybe the starved suits Leclerc and the opposite for Hamilton, or do you think that's just a coincidence?
I would definitely expect it to be the other way around, and do I think that'll be playing a part? I mean, you're right. Leclerc did get a slightly better start to the season, but I think just across the board, Hamilton has been closer on him. I think that while it might have played a slight part, I just feel that Hamilton's generally across the board been better this season. He just likes this iteration of cars a bit better than Leclerc does. And I think just in this race, maybe Leclerc found something. I think we might need a bigger sample set to see if that really is the case, to see if, we're going to Spa next, I think. So the Belgian Grand Prix will be another energy-starved circuit. If Leclerc is quicker there, again, it could just point to the fact that he sorted his form out. It could also point to that maybe he is doing a better job at circuits where he's more energy starved, and maybe he's been more crafty, finding ways to harness that and to save energy in places that maybe Hamilton isn't. I'm not sure, but I just feel that Hamilton's a bit closer across the board, and Leclerc, I still believe, is fundamentally the quicker driver at this point in their careers, and that when he sorts things out, he will, not as fast as he was last year compared to Hamilton, but he will be quicker. But that's an interesting thing to look out for, Charlie. It's something that I haven't thought about, so we'll keep an eye on that and see if that continues.
Right now, it's the point in this episode that we've all been waiting for. It's Max Corner, and it's a big one.
Yep.
So many rumours swirling around him and so much drama following the Dutchman around this season and this month in particular. So first of all, let's just have a bit of a general overview of how his race weekend went down. It was another disappointing one for him.
Yes, let's do that. It's not been an easy season to be a Max Verstappen fan, I have to say. And just when it looks like they're turning a corner, it all goes wrong again. Because in Austria, of course, we had the wing failure in qualifying. And, first of all, seeing Max Verstappen off the track, you don't expect to see that these days. It's very rare that he makes a mistake. And usually when he does, he's able to gather it back and find a way to get round it. So in Austria, when I saw him in the barriers, I immediately assumed something's gone wrong on the car. It turned out Laurent Mekies came out and confirmed that was the case, the wing not working. And then when I saw, because we were in Poole, we were by the harbour side, and I was looking at the BBC Sport updates and saw that Verstappen had gone off, and that's what caused the safety car. And then I was like, oh, rare mistake from Max Verstappen. I wonder what happened there. But then I saw that it was at Stowe Corner, which is a really like a medium speed, very high speed corner. I thought that could be the wing again. And it turned out to be. I mentioned briefly that in qualifying, Hadjar got the better of him, which he did. Verstappen has been saying throughout the weekend that there were issues with power deployment at the end of the straights, and The Race, which is a really good YouTube channel, did some digging and found that the time that he lost to Hadjar was all at the end of straights, which kind of corroborates what he was saying. Is that the right use of that word?
Yeah, like backs up.
Backs up, yes. Backs up what he was saying. And then in the race, he was driving really well. He managed to fight back up to third. I think he got a bit fortunate with that, just with the timings of everything and the strategy. And he was able to utilise... He seemed to be in a battle with George Russell throughout most of the race, and then Russell was about to pass him, and Max defended really well, but Russell then got a slow puncture and had to pit, which released Verstappen into third place. Until we got to that incident at Stowe Corner where, once again, as he goes into the braking zone, that wing is supposed to flip shut again to give him maximum downforce. And it didn't fully close, is what the team came out and said afterwards, which gave him a lot less downforce. And obviously, as an F1 driver, you have to trust that your car will give you everything that it's supposed to. And I think as soon as he brakes and turns in and he's got way less rear downforce, you can just see he's in a lot of trouble. He catches the first slide, but then in the end, it bites back again and sends him into the wall. And he was furious over the team radio, but like not in a sort of Max Verstappen, I really care about this furious, more of a Max Verstappen, I'm over this kind of furious. And we've seen that a few times this season. And at first there was the question, is he going to walk away from Formula One? The word coming out of the Verstappen camp is that he's pretty satisfied with the deal that has been struck to adjust the rules for next year and then again going forward. He's pretty happy with how that's looking. So it's now less of a case, we think, of him taking a sabbatical or even retiring from Formula One. It's now a case of, does he feel Red Bull's the best place to be at the moment? And I don't know if you heard about this, Charlie, but there was a heavily circulated rumour that was later confirmed by both camps that Verstappen's team met up with Zach Brown and discussed a McLaren move before this weekend. Zach Brown,
this weekend, not before this season.
Before this weekend, about a couple of days before the weekend. Zach Brown came out and said that he just wanted to sort of see what was going on. He said he's very committed to his two drivers. He said that Piastri and Norris have both got contracts. But the way he put it was, if there is ever a vacancy at my team, the first person I would go and talk to is Max Verstappen. Verstappen's camp were much more coy on it. They didn't really talk about it too much. When pressed, Verstappen kind of deflected it. And then after this race, he was asked, your car's failed again. He has discussed safety issues. He said it's not safe to drive this car at the moment. Does that make you look elsewhere? Obviously, you had a chat with McLaren. Where's your head at in terms of your future? And he said it wouldn't be fair to me for me to comment on that right now, which is not exactly him saying I'm committed to Red Bull. That's very much a deflection. And another key thing is that there's a clause in Max Verstappen's Red Bull contract which says that if he's not in the top 2 in the championship at this point after the British Grand Prix, he becomes a free agent and can break his contract. He has a month to do so, about a month or two to do so. So we could see F1 silly season kick into action, and if Max Verstappen makes a move, then the dominoes would start to fall and the pieces would start to rejig. But it's hard to see where it would go. Ferrari have got Hamilton for at least one more year. Leclerc is on a multi-year contract. Mercedes have got Kimi Antonelli pretty much tied down, and they've really backed him. And I don't see why they would get rid of Russell. And Russell's very much said, I want to stay here. I will be a Mercedes driver next year. And as far as we know, his contract is for at least another year. Same with McLaren. Norris has a multi-year contract. I think Piastri would be the one at risk if it was one of them. But Zach Brown's come out and said that I'm really committed to my drivers. And then where do you go after that? Because surely anything beyond that is a step down, unless you want to take a Fernando Alonso type gamble on, I don't know, an Alpine or an Aston Martin, but that doesn't seem like a very good idea at the moment. So I think it's probably just Max keeping his options open. But, you know, Zach Brown will want to maintain face and say that, yeah, I've got my 2 drivers. But if Max Verstappen comes to you and says, I want to be in your team, you might maybe think about making room for him. We'll see.
Yeah, I get Zach Brown's point there, and obviously he needs to back his drivers, but I don't think if Max Verstappen does move, by the sounds of it and what you're saying with the contract situations of all of those 6 drivers, that it would be the case of, you know, it being good, perfect timing for someone to just slot out and Max to slot in. I do think whoever wants to get Max, and I imagine everyone will be interested, they'll have to ruffle a few feathers and maybe just be really unfair to a driver, to be honest, and that's not nice to think about. But
if there's a gap that I've created...
Yeah, it's just true, because you think about those 6 drivers in contention to lose their seat for Max Verstappen, maybe, you know, they're 6 really good drivers. It's not the case really in any of the big 3 teams minus Red Bull at the minute, where, you know, there's a clear number 1 and number 2, because maybe you would have said that about Mercedes, but then the number 2, Kimi Antonelli, not only is he the protege of Toto Wolff, but he's also leading the championship. And then you go to McLaren. Yeah, Piastri was the number 2, but again, he, you know, almost won the title last year. Norris obviously got there in the end, but I think Piastri kind of fought his way up to almost an equal, if not quite there by the end of the season. And then we've just talked in length about Ferrari. Obviously, both drivers have won 1 race now. Obviously, Leclerc, their long-term plan probably, but Hamilton are great of the sport and doing better so far than Leclerc this season. So it's really hard to imagine who might make way. And I think I agree with you that Oscar Piastri is the most vulnerable. But also, if we cast our mind back to last season, before the Top Step even existed as a podcast, but me and you spoke as friends at length about the fact that it seemed like George Russell was going to get booted out in favour of Max Verstappen that season. So I think with Antonelli only kind of boosting his credentials this time around, I think it probably, crazy to say it, but Piastri most vulnerable, but I would probably say that I think George Russell is the second most vulnerable of those drivers.
I would agree with that, and he still might win the championship this year. And I don't think it's an impossible world where Russell wins the championship and then gets booted out of the seat. I think that's possible. It'd be ridiculous and crazy, but it's possible. It just, from what we're hearing at the moment, we heard about that McLaren contact. Also, I think a key thing that I didn't mention, and the reason why Max's attention might turn to McLaren now, is that his engineer, friend, long-time support member of his team, Giampiero Lambiase, GP they call him, is moving to McLaren next year. So it would just make a lot of sense for and GP, it seems, from what we've heard, the rumours, has a bit of a long-term future mapped out at McLaren, which he never would have got at Red Bull, to be team principal one day. If Zach Brown wants to step back and maybe move into like an upstairs role, which he kind of already is. He's kind of like CEO, and then Andrea Stella is kind of team principal, but Zach Brown is still the face of it. So they've got a weird system at McLaren, which might give GP a chance to be team principal. And you can bet that if GP becomes the team principal at McLaren, the first person he's going to look to sign is Max Verstappen. And you can also bet that if Max is going to go anywhere, he's going to go and want to be with the team that's being run by his old mate.
Yeah, I guess one final thing I would say on that is, if he's looking for improved reliability, Max Verstappen in the medium or short term, then McLaren's probably not the place he wants to be going to.
That's a good point. They haven't been very great on that front either. But I suppose he will probably say that the McLaren, at least isn't pitching their drivers into a spin, at corners, left, right, and centre. But we'll see. I mean, it could just be Max's camp's way of trying to really make it clear to Red Bull that they need to sort themselves out. It might be a case that they are, using it as a bit of a smokescreen, a bit of a signal to Red Bull. But the chances definitely seem to be there, seeing as that contract situation gives them the chance to possibly move, and the meeting that we know took place. So yeah, we're going to watch this space because it could be a seismic move in the driver market.
Yeah, just to quickly read out some of his quotes about it after the race. He said, "I would be a very zen person to be optimistic at the moment with what happened again this weekend." He said, "I'm sorry, but it's just like that." He said, "I need a few days, I think, to reset and try again. Everyone is trying their best. I'm not blaming one person or whatever. It's just painful for everyone, that this has happened. I just want to finish races, first of all. That would be nice." But yeah, again, obviously, something that McLaren have had big problems with.
Issues with, yeah.
But I guess the other thing to think about in terms of Red Bull next year is, as it stands, they won't be able to make engine upgrades. So it might mean that they're unable to really get back competing in the place where Max Verstappen needs them to be to continue to be a Red Bull driver.
Yeah, and that'll be another reason why he might be a bit worried. Red Bull have protested the Adduo thing, and we're expecting the outcome of that to happen at the next Grand Prix weekend, which I'm just going to confirm is the Belgian Grand Prix F1 calendar, which will be very exciting if it is. Spa is one of the best tracks. It's on the 19th of July, so we've got a little bit of a break, and then we go to the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, which is where we'll probably see the outcome of the Adduo. But from what we're hearing, we don't expect there to be too many changes there, and I think Red Bull will probably have to suck it up, and deal with the fact that they're not going to be able to make any engine upgrades.
Yeah, so that's another frustrating weekend for Max Verstappen, but in the context wider of the race, it led to what you've described as safety car ouchies.
Yes.
But I'll give you credit here, actually, because you also said Max's Red Bull gives him wing failures, which was a nice little pun, which I didn't read out, first of all. I like that. But yeah, what happened with the safety car?
Yeah, so Max's incident sent him into the wall with a big crash, and obviously brought out the safety car. One thing I didn't mention about with Austria is that when Max's crash in qualifying happened, they threw a single yellow flag, which meant George Russell could take pole by sort of lifting off slightly, but not nowhere near enough to affect his time enough to deny him pole. So this time they were very quick to throw out the safety car. So that was all fine. And then we got round onto the penultimate lap, and we got a notification on the screen saying safety car ending, and all the commentators started to say, we're going to have a one-lap shootout at the British Grand Prix. All these travelling fans who have paid so much money are going to get a grandstand finish. And then the safety car didn't peel into the pits, and they all went, what's going on? And then the safety car just led them around, and Charles Leclerc won the race under the safety car, and it finished that way. And what that is and why that's happened is because after there was a race that was fairly under the radar race in 2021 called the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, where there was a small incident with the safety car, where the rules were at the time sort of up to the discretion via a very small clause up to the discretion of the race director, which Michael Massey, of course, infamously used to give us a grandstand finish, which was the correct decision in 2021. But then in the uproar around that, they added a new sort of counter clause to that, which said that there now has to be a lap between the drivers who are a lap down being allowed to pass the safety car, and they must be given a full lap to reattach themselves to the back of the pack. So that was the rule that was used, and the FIA and the stewards and race control thought that they had given that signal in time, but it turns out that due to some sort of delay in transmission or over the radio waves, Oscar Piastri, who was the first car who was going to go past and unlap himself, was actually across the line when that order was given. So they realised they were breaking their own rules, and quickly had to scrap the last lap and say, no, we can't do it because we've broken our own rules, which shows that Michael Massey was correct and it never should have changed, and 2021 is the right way to do things. Which obviously I'm saying as a Max Verstappen fan, but generally I've always been in the belief that we should do whatever we can to have a last lap happen under racing circumstances. That's why, because Mercedes were big lobbyists in 2021 for this to be the case, because they felt that it would actually, if anything, be the other way around, and they'd be behind and having to be trying to pass Verstappen. As it turns out, their lobbying probably cost them a title. And now all this uproar is happening around this race because we've changed the rules, and the opposite happened. And I think really you've got to pick one. I personally want to see racing on the last lap, and if that means that we have to do it a bit hurriedly, as long as everything's done safely, I don't really care. I want to see racing. So but really this was more of a procedural error. I think something's gone wrong whereby they didn't get the message out quick enough, which is just an error from race control somewhere. I think the full, like the Monaco Grand Prix pit lane thing, the full sort of inquiry into what happened is still to come, and we'll hear more about it over the next few days. It certainly seems that they intended, and all the graphics suggested that they intended to have a final lap shootout, but for whatever reason they got it wrong, the timing was wrong, or it was delayed in getting to Oscar Piastri, which meant that he didn't have a full lap to catch back up. So yeah, it robbed us of what would have been, I'm sure, a scintillating finish. And I think a couple of drivers, namely George Russell in particular, who stayed out and took a gamble that he would be able to hold on that last lap, certainly had it a lot easier because he didn't even have to defend. So again, luck possibly working in George Russell's favour, and absolutely against Kimi Antonelli, because it meant he didn't have a lap to try and break away a 5-second gap from the car behind and stay in the points, which he in the end was unable to do. So yeah, controversy follows F1 everywhere, I suppose, certainly with safety cars.
Yeah, certainly not something that's going to go away anytime soon. Looking forward then to wrap this one up to Spa. We'll have our usual what's become kind of staples in, first of all, trying to analyse how Spa will perform under these new regulations, but also maybe just a little bit of Johnny rage at the fact that I think, as you've mentioned, that this might not be a regular fixture in F1 in the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the great circuits of all time. It's some drivers would describe it as the best circuit in the world, certainly top 3, I would say, on the calendar, alongside maybe Silverstone and the Japanese Grand Prix. Maybe throw Brazil in there as well. I personally think Brazil is the best, but certainly as a driving for driving enjoyment, they all love Spa. And the fact that it's been taken off the calendar to sort of rotate because they're bringing in these new street circuits, I think particularly the new Spanish Grand Prix at the Madrid ring, the Mad ring, which just looks pretty terrible. Well, not terrible, but just okay. Pretty lifeless, pretty soulless. It has got a bank to turn. Let's reserve judgment on that until we get to it. But just from what we've seen so far, it's nowhere near what Spa was. And actually, frustratingly, for the first time in a long time, it looks like the regulations were set to really suit this circuit, because it became difficult to pass there, even though it's got a lot of long straights, because cars were just so spread out going into them, because the middle sector is so windy. It's a brilliant stretch of track, but you can't really pass, which would stretch cars out and meant they couldn't pass. Whereas now, with this being an engine-starved circuit, there'll be a lot of yo-yoing, and I think it'll be a really good Grand Prix, maybe the best one we've had at that track for a while, and then suddenly it'll come off the calendar. Let's just confirm exactly when is Belgium GP rotating, because there are going to be some years where it just isn't going to be. It will stay on the calendar for 2026 and 2027, but then it will miss out 2028, be on the calendar 2029, miss out 2030, and be on the calendar 2031. So that's 2 2 years off, and during those off years, it will rotate with the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya in order to make space for the Madrid. Frustrating. And these tracks with such history, we really have to cling on to them and treat them with respect. And it's a real shame. And I really hope it's a great race, and it shows everybody what it'll be missing in those 2 years that it's taken off the calendar.
Yeah, I'll just end with this quote as a headline from The Guardian's Nasra Abdi, which puts it quite well. It just says, F1's heart and soul lies in Spa, but the clamour for glamour puts it at risk. And that's a good headline, isn't it? It's not quite Max's Red Bull gives him wing failures.
That's the Sun, isn't it? That's the Sun headline. Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, so much to ponder for the sport. I think it seems like it's quite an existential time for the sport this year and in general, but also, just a thoroughly entertaining one on the track so far. And we're really not any closer to knowing who's going to lift this title at the end of it, which is exciting. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for sticking with us. And apologies that this hasn't been an absolute classic, it's fair to say. And my apologies to Johnny and to the audience about the camera issues. But we are back, as a certain Cristiano Ronaldo said, after putting 2 past Uzbekistan and then getting promptly knocked out. Yeah. We're back. Hopefully ours is a bit more meaningful than that, and we won't be...
We're going to have a more solid cup run, I think.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Fingers crossed. But yeah, good to be back. We'll bring you some Stokes updates when we can. Can't wait to get our teeth into that, and also can't wait for the Belgian GP. And anything else to say from you, Johnny?
I really like how we both automatically looked towards the non-existent camera when doing that outro. But yes, this will be a bit of an audio exclusive, and then we'll take a look at the cricket, and hopefully by that point we'll be a bit further towards our technical peak, I would say. I still won't have that mic because it's still at home and I won't be able to bring it for another couple of weeks, but at least it looks like that mic is working in your laptop now. And that means we should have a camera and we should be good to go for that one. So Bosch, all's well that hopefully ends well.
Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Goodbye.